Our guest today is Cole Hunton. Coach Hunton is the head girls basketball coach at Amundsen in the Chicago Public League. We get into the inner workings of the Chicago Public League, building a program from the ground up, and his unique marketing perspective of growing the girls' game and marketing yourself as a coach. As always, thanks for listening to the After the Timeout podcast. So, Coach, we start every episode with what we call the opening tip. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us about your Amundsen program, how your season went, maybe a little bit about, if we came watch you play, what your guys' identity is, and then looking forward, where your program's going.
Yeah. So our program at Amundsen, I just wrapped year 3. So year 1 was 2019-2020 for us. We're a CPS school up on Damon and Foster, 3A. And we just wrapped what I would say probably the most successful season in program history, 20-13, won our conference, which now puts us in the Red Northwest, which you guys are familiar with how the CPL works and that merit-based and moving on up. So we've checked that box to where we want to get to. When I got there, we were all the way down in the green, which was the lowest. So each year we've climbed our way up and gotten to where we want to get to. And then we were regional finalists too this season and lost in the regional final. So overall, really successful. I think one of the best parts about it is we only graduate 2 seniors. And so with 4 juniors coming back and 5 sophomores coming back and so on and so forth, and a couple players coming up. So the future is really bright for us, and we're right where we want to be. In terms of our identity and what, if somebody was to come watch us play, on the intangible side of things, really 2 things I want to stress us and be known for is a team that competes in every possession and in every game. And I know a lot of coaches say that, right? But we really mean it. And no matter if we're up 20, down 20, we're always want to be that program that's looking for those competitive moments and be one that a team walks away with and says that they really compete at every possession. And, second thing being one that, and I put this word in there when I talk about it with our identity is playing hard with purpose, right? And making sure that that other team that we're going against knows that we played really hard and they felt it, right? And those are the 2 identity things on the intangible side. In terms of the X's and O's and getting on the court, we want a team that plays with a lot of pace and a lot of tempo. One that probably lives and dies by the 3 a little too much, but given the lack of size that we have, we like to play that game. And then we want to be hyper aggressive on defense and try to create ourselves some easy turnovers. And that's our identity. We hope we stick to it. We hope people see that. I know John and I have played each other the last couple of seasons, and he does a pretty good job of making sure that we don't get to live and die by the 3. So, but it's one of the things that stands out the most. In terms of our goals going forward for the program, with going into year 4, is for me personally, and in the message we're getting out is we can now focus on those standard things that I think the elite programs focus on, right? That's getting to 20 wins. That's putting yourself into the regional final and ultimately winning it. That's for us from a conference perspective, maintaining where we're at, right? We're in the red. We don't want to fall out of that. And so those where compete in the conference, obviously we'd love to compete for a conference championship. That certainly comes into question. But I think the 2 first ones become our goal. The second thing as it pertains to the program is we can now start creating that real continuity from our varsity to our sophomore to our freshman. And I think that's the unique part of being a CPL school and maybe starting at the bottom is you're so varsity driven those first 2 years that you're kind of putting a lower level together to put it together. This was really the first year where I'm like, okay, we've got a really robust freshman and sophomore group, can put them in challenging tournaments, can get them a robust non-conference. They can come with us to go play in our non-conference games, and I can feel comfortable about it. So, that goal going forward, as we look at the big picture program wide, is to start creating that continuity and start creating to where players are developing at the lower levels the right way, not necessarily getting thrown into the fire, pulled out the varsity. We can be that way. So
I wanted to follow up on something you said about the competing aspect of it, right? Because like you said, I think a lot of coaches say that, and I kind of go by the wooden code of success is doing the best, best you can with what you have, kind of paraphrasing it, but that it's the same thing, right? Competing to the best you can. For your program, I guess as a coach, what are you looking for to indicate that? And then on the flip side, how do you show your players what that looks like, sounds like, right? Even feels like, because I think that's an important part, because a lot of players think, I'm competing, but
right. Yeah, it's a great question. So the first part of it, Todd, is how do we show that to our players? And the easiest thing, especially with this year, is you show it in the practice environment, right? And you show it by the minutes that you earn when the lights go on and we get to put our jerseys on and go play a team in a different color with a different name, right? And that's one of the areas we focus on it as, is given that we've been able to bring talent in, right? Practice can now truly be split right down the middle, red team, white team, first and seconds, if you will, or people that are jockeying for those spots in terms of the depth chart can get after it. And so we show that, and we chart scores. The standard things you try to get done in the practice environment is what we try to do with to show it there to the player side. But I think the really easy way that we show it there is on the game minutes, right? And we can attest back to what happened in practice. That's where it starts there for me. To that second part, an example that I think stands out to me a lot is, and it's usually when we're down, but it's a real teachable moment, is when you're fighting uphill and clearly you've lost, right? And you're hovering right around that 20-point avenue. And you're going into the fourth quarter, and we all know there's that number of 30, right? As soon as it hit 30, that clock's moving. And we've had a couple of times this season where we're competing, not necessarily because we know what the outcome's going to be. We already, you know in the back of your mind, but you're competing for those extra minutes, right? To where the clock's starting and stopping. And you're competing for that opportunity to play in the game as it's supposed to. You're not up against a running clock where that fourth quarter goes like that, right? So, that's one of the examples that stands out to mind for me in terms of how do you get that taught, or how we use it in terms of a game component to get that, to really teach those competitive moments.
So just for our listeners, Todd and I kind of know what the difference is in the colors, but so for the red, who are some of those teams in the red, just for our listeners to kind of understand where you're going to from where you were from?
Yeah. So where we're going to, for our side exclusively, but also I'll talk just as the red in totality. Whitney Young, Kenwood, Simeon, Lane Tech, Peyton, Taft, Northside. That's Morgan Park as we get to the other side of things. Hyde Park, I know, was a regional finalist too as last year. So that is the Westinghouse. I don't want to leave them out. That is the Lincoln Park is in there too. So that's the world that we are headed to in terms of what our conference schedule will look like. And it's one that is good. It's going to be beneficial for us.
So going now into your career a little bit, we kind of do our homework on everybody, as Todd and I like to say, and you've coached JUCO and high school and AAU. What are some of the commonalities, either similarities or challenges, that you find in each one?
Yeah, the easiest similarity is, and it's a similarity and a difference, but the similarity is bringing collective group of people and getting them to work together, right? And understanding each player, getting to know, understand each player, what their skill set is, both on the court, but then who they are as an individual, and then how does that fit as a team collectively. That's the similarity. Now, the difference with it too being the same time is the amount of time you have at each of those stops, if you will. So if I was to touch on my time in the junior college world, there's really two approaches in JUCO ball, right? You can be that, hey, we're bringing in, got players for 2 years, same team for 2 years, system, et cetera, move them on. And with a couple of transfers here and there, you can be that program that's starting fresh from scratch every single year. That was the program that I was a part of. And one where it was a brand new roster year in and year out. So you were really trying to meld and mesh personalities together in a short amount of time a year, oftentimes not. And that was really draw some similarities in the AAU side of things too, right? Like the goal for an AAU program is to have continuity, but you're slowly spending such a short amount of time on the AAU side, 2 nights, a couple of days of practice a week, and then you're playing on the weekends. So it's like, how do you mold that together and get them playing? Whereas in the high school side, and as you guys can attest to, you've got more time, right? Like hopefully you're working with 4 years for players and building that together. So those two are the biggest challenges for each for me, but it's also the difference between them two. And I think my background in each of them has helped us or helped me be successful with where we're at today. With knowing the amount of investment that you need to put into your players in a short amount of time, quickly, upfront, and get them bought in, and then you can start, building that culture and building that program up.
All right, so let's build on that. We talked about this going into your third year here, and and you built to where you are now, right? That red and when you first started, you weren't there. So when you first started, what are the 2 or 3 things you did to lay the foundation to start building to where you wanted to go?
Yeah. The first thing that I did was educate and show and talk and use examples of what a successful high school basketball program looked like and what that entailed. And so it was, and that education piece was on the administration side, it was on the parent side, and it was on the player side. And they knew they wanted to be better. They wanted to be at the level of the schools that I had mentioned earlier who are in our conference, but they didn't know the how. And I don't think they even understood. So we started with that education piece. That was one of the first things you did, right? Hey, you got the opportunity to play 31 games, et cetera. You get to that number as close as you can. It's a 6 day a week commitment in terms of in season. You get that off day. We practicing every day. This is what robust looks like. Here's what the off season looks like, et cetera. That was number one, was showing what this is and using examples. Then the second thing became the players. And it was, for lack of a better term, a culture cleanse. Like I knew, okay, we have this really hungry and engaging and eager and with some talent freshman class. There's a few sophomores that, with one that I knew really wanted more, and 2 that I thought maybe, or 1 other that we could get there. And that's where it started. And I said, hey, we're taking the 10 to 12 best girls, regardless of what their age is, and you're going on varsity, and we're going to be varsity driven, and we're going to find a way. And we started there. Yeah, I identified 2 players, or actually the 2 seniors that are graduating this year, as those that I knew could withstand the change. Those that couldn't, they were going to make their decisions organically for themselves. We all know that happens when change comes in. And they did that. And then I focused on those freshmen that were playing for us. And I knew that they were all eventually going to be our culture shares this year, next year, et cetera. And that's where we went. And that's where we laid the foundation. And we certainly took our lumps. We accomplished our goal of winning our conference, which gets us to moved up. And it's almost trial by fire, if that makes sense, right? Just threw them into the deep end right away. And hey, this is going to be tough. There's going to be a ton of growing pains, and there's going to be a lot of outside noise. But if this is where we want to get to, this is what we have to do. So it was starting young, it was educating, and then it was just doing. And when we wrapped that year one, I think, I don't know if the foundation was solidified, but I felt like we had those. I'm not a construction guy, but we had the wooden planks in the right spots, and everything was good to go.
So we wanted to kind of turn it now to your experience as a freshman coach. And we all know, Todd and I have been there, the days of being a freshman coach, where basically when you're the freshman coach, it's, hey, these are the kids left from that tried out, they're on your team, and kind of putting that together. And, sometimes those kids are invested, sometimes they're just there to be there.
Yep.
So just take us through your experience as a freshman coach and some things you learned from that specific level.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I learned, that it's not about you, and it's not about it's certainly about your goals, because I think any good head coach should want that for his assistants or her assistants, but you're there to develop. It's the program first, and you're there to take the group of kids that you have and do your job the right way, in terms of, hopefully not all of them, but you get a couple to the other side that in 2-3 years down the line, they can be varsity contributors. I remember this conversation really vividly when I was at Freeport High School, and the varsity coach was Jeff Lawfer. And Coach Lawfer was really, really good to me. And one of the first, and understanding that I was also coaching junior college basketball still at the same time, right? So because my junior college job was not highly paid at all. So I started coaching with the freshman program at Freeport. And one of the first things, he was very blunt from the onset, like, hey, we're going to move the best players up. Like, this is the group you want to get, but I want to start creating some continuity down there. So I might leave some talented players down there, et cetera. The only thing I ever asked was, I said, hey, I get it. I know it's not about me. This is, what do you need from me? I go, just please don't shake my roster up every other week and start moving kids up and down. Like, can we keep this consistent? And that was one of the things that we were able to do. But in terms of those lessons, John, like I said, it's not about you. It's you've got to, I won't say you're setting your ego aside a little bit, but you may be running some stuff that you don't buy into, that you really don't believe in, or that, may not fit what you like, but hey, it's about the program first, and winning's important, but I think that development part is more important, and you almost got to swallow it a little bit and just, keep that big picture at the forefront of your mind.
All right, so let's dive into your marketing background. Let's just talk about the game of girls basketball, women's basketball in general. Yep. How can the game, from even the pro side all the way down, continue to grow and market itself better from a business side, from a people watching side?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I think lacks is stories, right? And telling a compelling story, and let's start with the WNBA, right? Like, I think you see, and we'll just use a local example, like a Candace Parker, right? And locally, if we've grown up in the state of Illinois, and you know what a little bit of that background is, right? And where her journey is at, but is it relevant on a national, right? Like, and so tying those stories together, like, I think one of the things that's unique, like, well, I'll just use it because it just wrapped, right? Like the Olympics, right? When you hear about we're using the Winter Olympics, whether it's let's use the men's curling team, right? Like nobody knew these guys, but they told a great story, right? And that became compelling to people, and people became more engaged. So to tie that together using that kind of Olympic example is, I think we've got to tell better stories, right? And because they all have them, and some may be different than others, but getting those stories out there, and because the platforms are there to do it now, especially. I think that's the number one thing, and then that's going to trickle down, right? I think they can do the same when we get to the women's tournament. I love the women's tournament. I think it's exciting, and again, it's that we can turn on the men's tournament, and we know that we turn on the men's tournament for for the men's college basketball. You know that once you get to the Elite Sweet 16, there's going to be a cool story about whatever Cinderella team, right, or whatever player that you didn't hear about, right? Let's do that on the women's side and tell those stories and get that connected, and then that gets people engaged. And then all of a sudden in today's era, we're Googling or you're following that person on social media, and now it's going. So for me, is I just always talk about that story piece, right? Like creating those stories, creating those brands of those individuals, telling those stories, because it's going to resonate somewhere with somebody. And that's where that investment begins and starts for people.
I do think that's a great point, because if you think about shows like College Game Day for football or basketball, it's all it is, just all telling personal stories.
Yep.
So let's now talk about ourselves as marketing ourselves as a coach. I did love your comment you just made a couple minutes ago about coaching underlevel basketball, and it's not about you, but when you are trying to take that next step from an assistant to being a head coach, or you're a head coach somewhere and you're looking for a larger school or whatever it may be, how do you market yourself as a coach? What would maybe be some advice you have for somebody that's been an assistant for a while and now wants to make that jump one chair over?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to do it, right? I think one of the easy things is we've got this thing called social media now, right? And so it's whether it's you're using it to market your program with where you're at or what you're currently doing. I think that's one way to do it. I probably don't do enough of it in terms of the X's and O's aspect. I could probably be a little bit better at it, but marketing yourself in that regard, right? And kind of showing who you are, your brand, what you're doing, and where you're at. That's the easiest one. For me, I rely on the networking side, right? And getting out and meeting people in the game that have been, have a strong profile, and not necessarily to get something out of them, but just to make sure that they know who you are and cultivate on that relationship. I think that's one of the things I've tried to consistently do, especially as I've worked exclusively in the women's game for the last 4 or 5 years, is just in one of the easiest ways to do it was on the scheduling component, right? Reaching out and making and getting those matched up, and then just cultivating those relationships. One of the other things too is I've got it sitting over my shoulder. It's not a cheap plug, but get involved in your coaches associations. I think that's huge, especially for the young ones just getting out of college and wanting to get into teaching or coaching, et cetera. Get involved, because there's that opportunity window there, whether it's your state association, whether it's on a national level. Get that involvement there, and then people organically in this coaching circle, they ask what your background is. It's just one of the common questions that always gets asked. Hey, where'd you come, et cetera. And that's where it goes from there. So that's I've tried to go more so the old school way of marketing myself, and just connecting with people in an individual aspect, getting involved in the associations as much as possible, and then letting my work speak for itself, letting my personality and who I am speak for itself, and the work that you're doing in the program that you're involved in speak for itself too.
So you talked about getting involved in the national level. Let's go into USA basketball a little bit. Your gold license, but first of all, USA basketball does a lot of great stuff. But tell us what that means for anybody who's not kind of up to date on that. And then, how is USA basketball helping to continue to grow the game and the development in the United States? And what are maybe some things we can do differently to work on that development piece?
Yeah. So in terms of the gold license aspect of it, really is you get recognized as that coach that's kind of gone through their process, if you will, right? And you get access to that content, and you get put on the USA basketball database. That's what that provides you, and brings you a part of that network and that community, if you will. In terms of what USA basketball has done for me personally, and just I think for the game, is it's given some structure to some really fundamental things that, and you put a brand behind it, right? That's important, right? USA basketball's behind it. So when you hear that, and we all know, since the Dream Team, what's the rich tradition of USA basketball is, barring that little setback there in the early 2000s. But so you have that brand there, right? And so, but to get to my point, really fundamental basic things that we all knew as coaches and that we all learned, such as what's the right ball size for a player to use, what's the right height of rim they should be shooting at, certain rules that we know are important in terms of development, like man-to-man and what the right things to teach in those aspects. That I think has been the biggest help, because now if you're talking to a parent or anybody else at a younger level, you can sit there and point to these things, right? And now there's a little bit of some credibility behind it. The second thing, or another thing that I think that's been good about it is it's heightened something that I think we've probably all done when we played in growing the game, but the value in playing 3-on-3 and playing in smaller non-5-on-5 settings, right? I think that's been the biggest thing USA basketball has done. And I know we play 3-on-3 as much as possible in our girls' practices, off season, in season. It's huge, and I think that has done wonders for the game. And then that's, I think, shown a lot of value to players and to the development piece of it. So those are a couple of things that I've taken out of it and gotten the value from USA basketball.
All right, so now let's turn to the real fun kind of conversation. Let's talk some CPL basketball. Let's talk what it's like to coach in the CPL. And we can even add, if we want, some COVID elements to the last year and a half, 2 years in CPL. So just, for our listeners that, we do have listeners from different states, what are some things about the Chicago Public League you could talk about? And then for you personally, what are some of the great rewards of coaching in the CPL? And then let's talk about some of the more fun challenges.
Yeah, they'll probably demote me in conference if this gets out to everybody. Every day, I'm telling you, every conference game in the CPL is different. You don't know what you're going to get. It's one that's unique. It's challenging to get to that point. I'll just start on the back end of the second part of your question, John, is because the district is so big, right? It's just not, it creates different challenge. Everybody's challenges aren't the same, right? And everybody's situations aren't the same. And that becomes difficult, right? And that one size kind of fits all approach is hard. Especially when you're looking at schools that are really close to you that don't have to adhere to those same things. And so that's one of the challenges for me. And also how I think sometimes they try to separate themselves from the IHSA a little bit, like, hey, we're this. There's that disconnect, and so that's the biggest challenge for me, especially coming up from a kid that didn't grow up in the city and that is got tied to the game in the most organic possible way of what high school basketball should be and how the IHSA lays it out. Like, and then I come into the city and it's like, whoa, like, okay, this is different. So those are those challenges, but the rewards of it are, one is there is a respect level for the brand of CPL basketball. You have good players. And so when, especially now with being in that upper conference, one of the rewards for the program is when we travel to different parts of the state with our program, it's like the appreciation and that we're grateful that we came down to play them. It is like unbelievable. And I know it may not seem like a very rewarding, but it is for me, because it's like they're really appreciative that we've gotten outside the city bubble and come to play downstate, right? Or gone really far in the North Burbs to play. And so I think that, to me, that's been rewarding for our school and the program, but it's also been rewarding for our girls who grow up in the city. And we went down to Rock Island this year for our Thanksgiving tournament, and you would have thought I took them to middle and nowhere Kansas, right? Like, some of these girls had never seen a cornfield before in their life. Some of them didn't even realize where Rock Island even was. They had no clue. And so for me, that's the rewarding aspect of it too. Like, we just actually took our girls downstate yesterday for the championship games. And again, another experience. They're like, oh, wow, this is so unique. This is so cool. Like, this is what that is. So I guess the reward to sum it all together is a lot of firsts, right? And if you're, how I like to do things, you're giving them exposure to things that they would never otherwise see or have no clue that they even existed. So, that's the unique aspect of it's a rewarding aspect. But there's certainly some challenges that I make you scratch your head and wonder why this is different. When 2 days ago I played a non-conference opponent and I got a full 15 minutes to warm up, and somebody knocked on my door at halftime and told me that we had 10 minutes and et cetera. So every day is a mystery. I'll just say that much.
All right, so let's dive a little bit into X's and O's here. All right. You talked about your roster construction when you first started, and taking your best players and putting them up there. What was that process like for you on deciding? Because there's a couple different ways to go with it, right? You can, okay, this fits for my players, and this is what I'm going to do. It might not be something that I normally would do, or hey, I got these concepts in this system, and we're going to tweak it to that. So how did you decide on that? And then, is it like a talent and match it to the skills, or you match that to the X's and O's kind of thing? What is your philosophy on that?
Yeah, so I could tell you this: in year one, there was a couple. It was a little bit of both. It was, all right, I got to find our best players that are coming up, and here they go, whether they're freshmen or sophomores. But then the second thing was, how vested are they, right? Like, do they want what is going to become, brand new? And can they handle that, right? So I would say it was probably in year one, 70% the investment aspect. Who's ready for this? Who's ready to commit to the rigors of high school basketball and doing it at a varsity level, and probably 30% talent. Now, fast forward to these last 2 years with getting good players in, because we've been able to raise the profile of the school athletically in the girls basketball side. I start with talent and ability, and can they play, right? And is there a good foundation of basketball skill? Are they, can they play the game? Boom, they're coming up. And so now I think as we move forward to where we're quote unquote growing old, as I've liked to say, as we've built this thing, it can be a little bit of that 50-50, right? It can be to the need of what we want from a X's and O's standpoint. What holes do we need to fill philosophically? Like, what do we have and what can we do? And it can also be filling up that talent altogether as well, and a little bit more of that traditional process, right? Like, I'll give you an example of a girl we have up on the varsity roster. We don't have a ton of size, okay? But this girl is 5'10" and likely has another 2 inches in her, okay? She was greener than green her freshman year, which would have been the COVID season. And I literally knew that she was going to benefit the most from being in our varsity environment day in and day out. Was she definitely a lower level player? You're darn right she was, right? But we need size, and we need it sooner than later. And so this girl's got to come up. And I know that's one example that we've previously used, but I think as we continue on, it can get more to that, hey, here's how we want to play. Here's what we want to do. These are the types of players that we have. We're going to go do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it too. I want to just follow up. Have you ever tried to, maybe you thought in the off season, I'm going to do this X and O's Y's, and you get partway through the season and you're like, nope, that's out. And kind of what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah. So, we have gotten to that a little bit. I would say, this season a little bit, we went to that in terms of, okay, hey, we're gonna be hyper aggressive in that full court man-to-man aspect, and then realized, okay, well, we're playing a different brand of competition now. Maybe we should get a little bit more zone oriented and can control some tempo. So I think there's some of those things where conceptually it looks really good in summer and you have a level of success with it. And then you get, and it looks good in practice, right? Because everything looks good in those first 2 weeks of practice. It's fantastic, right? Like, I've watched a bunch of film. I'm feeling good. This is going to go well. And then you get to like 3 or 4 games underneath of you and you're like, nope, that's not working. That happened this year too. I'll use the example aside from kind of hyper aggressive man, that zone aspect. I made a decision. I thought we could play with 4-5 guards. And I thought and I made that decision a week before we started. And I thought this is going to look really good. I think this is going to really match us up well. And when we were staring at 0-4 in the face, 0-5, and I looked and I'm like, yep, we just have to play with a true 5. It's just better for us. And some things just don't pan out. So I think you got to learn that no matter how good something looks in practice and in your brain and on film, you got to be prepared that you're going to have to maybe bail on it and get back to either A, what you believe in, or B, what you've maybe been flirting with, just some changing wise. So it's just being that open to making those adjustments consistently. And that's typical coach talk right there, right? If you're not willing to make adjustments consistently, then I don't know how long you're going to last in this thing.
You'd be surprised in the over a year Todd and I have been doing this, what typical coach talk starts to sound like. So we want to go into our last 2 segments. The first one we call 30-second timeout.
Okay.
It's your chance to talk about anything you want to discuss. It can be about you, your program, your families, hobby you're into outside of basketball, really anything. The floor is yours. And as we like to say, there's no referee coming in your timeout. So it's a very loose 30 seconds.
Well, it's good. Just because I just got back from it this morning, what's your guys' take on the new format from state finals and having all 4 classes and switching from 2 weekends to 1 weekend? And stretching it out over 3 days. I don't know if you guys watched it all or whatever. I just would be curious I feel like we're struggling as a state to get this thing right. And I was reading Twitter before we got on, and it's just like, you had some people that were like, oh, I thought this was great. You got other people that like, move it. I'd love to hear from you guys.
Look at that. It's the first guest that's ever turned it back on us.
I know, right? Putting us on the spot.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I think I kind of like everybody there. I think it adds a new perspective. I don't know if the format necessarily worked this year, but I think it's like anything, you have to tweak it. I know the one game started at like 9:45 or something crazy like that, or ended at 10:30, with those third place games played on the same day.
Yep.
But I think it's kind of cool to get a different perspective for some of those 4As and 1As and see different teams. I think like anything, the first time you do it, you probably have to kind of tweak it. And, like you said, there hasn't been a great solution. There's kind of, problems here and advantages in other places, whatever we did.
Yeah.
I the only thing I will add is I was actually working out the other day, and I was listening to another podcast, and they were actually talking about college football, and they were talking about how some venues are just so big. Sometimes college football teams will play in an NFL stadium or just somewhere that's so big that even if they bring 50,000 fans and it's a 70,000 seat arena, on TV, you still see 20,000 empty seats. And, I almost wonder too sometimes, like, yes, we want it to be in these big arenas and we want it to be this big, massive event, but is there something better about a cozy venue? Is there something better about a smaller gym where, maybe it is better that if we have to, turn away 50 to 100 people because it's a smaller venue, it may look aesthetically better on television because, I think in watching Carmel and Naz last night, the Carmel student section was really loud and the Naz student section was really loud, but it's just such a big venue that when you show it on TV, there's going to be open seats everywhere. So I do wonder if there's an element of maybe we are to make a bad cliche, shooting our shot too big there. And then my other, thing that I would really like to study is what percentage of the state in the finals comes from various parts of the state. For example, the majority of 1A schools are going to come from south of Joliet. Maybe that state finals should be more localized. Whereas, let's be honest, if you look at the 4A state final, if you take out Edwardsville, if you take out, maybe some bigger schools in Peoria, I don't know how often a 4A state final isn't Stevenson, Barrington, isn't Whitney Young, Simeon, isn't, so I think there does have to be some regionalized, and I get what the state was trying to do in putting them all in the same weekend and trying to get people there. And I do think it's a great idea. And I know the IBCA, wants to promote, everybody in that same location. I just don't know if that's realistic if you really look at who's playing where and when.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are great points, and I agree with a lot of that, right? Like, I think it makes sense to have I like the idea of getting everybody together, right? I think that looks really good, because I can tell you this much, right? Like, from watching yesterday from 1A to 4A, right? Especially, speaking exclusively to the women's side of things, you got girls in the 1A, especially the guards from Galena. They know they can play 3 and 4A ball, hands down, right? Without a problem. And really, the only difference, like for me watching that, it's the size component, right? Like, you're not gonna get a Jordan Wood in Galena, Illinois, or Brimfield, Illinois. And you may, but like, that was the biggest difference. Whereas if we look at the boys' side, that you just watched a 1A game and there's a starking difference to a 4A game. I mean, that's just kind of the difference in the game. So I thought it was good for the women's game, especially to have all 4 classes there and for everybody to see that, hey, just because you're in a town of 1,000 people, there's girls that can hoop, right? And there's girls that can play. But I'm with you, like, that regionalized aspect. I think the biggest thing is the size of the arena, right? Like, why are we not, if Bloomington's a spot for girls, Okay, was Illinois Wesleyan not available? Right? We know there's some high schools that are really big and that have really great facilities. So I think that's one of the biggest thing is are we trying to go for something that's just not there, right? And look, that's great. The state of Ohio can fill up the shot center where Ohio State plays, and that's great. They can fill up Breslin up in Michigan. I just don't think that's how the state's made up in Illinois anymore. So we probably need to condense it down. But I would just be curious, just having gotten back from that, what your guys' take was, and so I liked it.
Yeah, and I mean, I would add to agree with you. I mean, Todd and I we both played teams from all around the state of all sizes. I mean, I could tell you just off with Todd and my schedule, we both played 1A Hope.
Yep.
I know Todd's in the same conference as Carmel and Naz and Bennett. And obviously
us, right?
I come from the conference of Loyola, Montini, St. Ignatius, Providence. So, there's great basketball all around the state. And I don't think that's the issue. I just think it's, I just think it's an issue because you brought up Ohio, and I'm just thinking about the state of Ohio. Think of how much longer the state of Illinois is, and think of how much the time difference to drive from Antioch, Illinois to Carbondale, Illinois. It's 6 hours. So right. I think that does play an element in it as well. But we could go this conversation all day. So.
I know, that's why I asked it, right? I went over my 30 seconds. I probably just got teed up.
No, that was great. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move into our next segment, quick hitters. Could be basketball, could be, I don't know, anything. We've been known to ask some goofy questions here in the past. I think yours is somewhat, not too goofy, but we won't throw anything too crazy at you. But shot clock or no shot clock?
Shot clock.
There we go.
Have to.
I saw that one coming.
Look, Naz and Carmel was a really fun game, but come on, if you were watching that, could you not tell me sometimes would somebody get a shot up for the love of God? Like, I know it was tough, but I was sitting there going, let's get this thing moving a little bit.
I watched Oswego East Bolingbrook sectional final. They didn't score a basket in the 2 overtimes. Because they both won the zone, held the ball. Now, probably reasons for it, matchup things. I didn't see earlier in the game, but that's kind of how the game ended, a double overtime game to go to the super sectional. So
correct.
All right, so let's go with this. Doesn't have to be basketball related. It doesn't even have to be sports related. But, with your marketing background, we thought we'd ask this fun one. The best logo of all time that people you think remember or really sticks out.
Oh, I mean, it's hard not for it to be related to basketball. It's the Jumpman logo. That thing will live on forever. And you could probably put the swoosh in a close second right with it. But yeah, that hands down, because here's why. And it's partly because of MJ and being able to do it. That thing's going to end up on fishing boats. That thing's going to end up on NASCARs. That thing's going to end up on places that and just grow. So without a doubt, I mean, that's going to be a tough one to beat. I don't care what industry we're talking about. That one will live on forever.
All right, similar question. Your favorite commercial of all time?
Yeah, so keeping it, I'm going to switch sports. It's not one specific commercial, but it's a group of them. I think that the Tiger Woods commercials that Nike has done are some of the best commercials I've ever seen. And listen, I know we're talking about a controversial person, but from the one that they put together after he came back from the whole scandal thing was fantastic. Going back to the initial one before he played in the Greater Milwaukee Open, before kind of branding commercials were really an it thing, to the Masters one, I think they've hit every Tiger Woods commercial they've ever done. The serious ones, I don't care the fact that it's golf. the fact that I get every one of them makes the hair on my back of my neck stand up without a doubt, right? The MJ one about where they're taking the pictures and, he's failed over and over again. That's why I say that one's great, but I just think any of the Tiger Woods ones, I can't even name a favorite one. They've all been home runs in my opinion.
It's funny because I was thinking the Be Like Mike ad, or there's a lot of really good Gatorade ones as well.
Yeah.
They kind of go along with that exact same theme.
Yes.
All right. So now we thought you'd have a really good answer to this to entertain us all a little bit. So what's the craziest or most interesting game you've ever coached in? Got a good story?
So I do. And it has more so to do with what took place after the game than it does with it, but it was interesting in all the same time. So this was when I was actually an assistant coach at the junior college level, and we were out at the national tournament in Hutchinson, Kansas. And nobody probably knows where Hutchinson, Kansas is at, but it's in the middle of nowhere. And we were just not playing well in the opening round game, and it was so we're coming down late down the stretch, and the scoreboard said one thing in terms of the number of timeouts. Okay, the officials, I remember this like it was clear as day, communicated one thing to us after the last huddle in terms of timeouts, and the book had an entirely different thing in terms of what the timeouts were. Okay, so it was my job, all right, at I think I was 27 at the time, was to keep track of the timeouts. Okay, I had what was up on the scoreboard, which I presumed was right. And so we go to call timeout, and that was what was supposed to be what I thought was our last timeout. And anyway, speeding the story up, we thought we were out. Okay. The book and the official, okay, had us with 2 timeouts remaining. So we came down late and never burned a timeout because I thought we were out of timeouts. And so this whole fiasco went off, and it's junior college basketball, right? So, I mean, like, there's all sorts of stories going on. But anyway, I think one of the unique things about it is I had to, my head coach was just livid, just absolutely irate. I literally had to walk him all the way up the stairs to go do local radio so he wouldn't turn around and go after the officials, because he was looking for anybody and everybody to get out of there. The interesting story about that is he's yelling at me the entire time like I'm the one that just cost us the game, or I'm the one that screwed up the whole timeout situation. So it probably maybe not one of the crazier things, but the interesting thing was never this happens to this day. Was told one thing, I had another, the book had one thing, and the scoreboard said a different thing. Never as in my life has even happened ever again, and that includes in any CPL game too, by the way.
It's always
now. Did you actually burn all those timeouts?
No, because we thought we were out.
No, but I'm saying, like, if you went back and looked at the film, was your count right?
We had no timeouts left. We have no clue how the book still had us for 2 timeouts left. We have no idea how the officials still had us for timeouts left. Because when he said it, I didn't think much about it. Like, this guy doesn't know. Then
it's not that okay, we took a timeout. Check.
Right.
Take a timeout. Check.
No. To this day,
we're out of timeouts.
I still have no clue what happened.
That's crazy.
It's always hard to count to 5 for some people.
Apparently.
I don't know.
All right. So what's your go-to gear in games? Are you a fancy guy? You're a casual guy?
This is a loaded question because I know who put this one in here.
Yeah.
Right now. I do dress up for games. I haven't gone into the casual aspect of it. So I do. I'm in a suit coat typically sometimes. Now I have gone to a new format, which is dressed down a little bit, still have trousers on, still have dress shirts, still have dress shoes. But I've termed it competitive casual. So I guess I've added that to that.
I like it.
So, no, I get dressed up. That's
One
kind
of
of
the
my
best,
fun
one of the
thing.
best dressed around. Phenomenal white suit or red suit coat. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh, he's got the
Well,
red
hey.
suit coat. I like that. See,
He
I could
does.
go with that. Like, gotta
Phenomenal.
get some color in there. So
Yeah, I have this. This is probably dorky, but I have this philosophy. So I remember this story. My mentor, where I had coached a guy named Pete Norman when I was coaching at junior college. We were sitting on the bench for a game, and he made this comment to me once that he's like looking over, and he goes, I learned this a long time ago from one of the guys I worked under, that if 3 of your starters are better than 3 of their starters, you'll win 70% of your games. And I thought of that. So that didn't end there. So I thought, well, wait a minute, where does the other 30% come into play, right? Like, what are we talking about? So over the course of time, and I navigate through my coaching career, I'm like, you know what? If I outdress the opposing head coach, I might win 30% of my games. And so that's where I've added that into. So now there's just the 10% you have to leave up for chance, right? Because I like to think about things in 110%. So I've carried that with me, right? If somebody asks, like, well, 3 of your starters are better than 3 of their starters, you'll win 70% of your games. However, if you make an effort to outdress the opposing head coach, you could win 30% of your games. So that's where that kind of stems from.
I like it.
He is one of the best dressed. Well, Coach, we appreciate you joining us today. There was some great content about marketing yourself and talking about CPL and different levels of basketball, and then obviously a great discussion on the state playoffs. So thank you again for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. This is I am a frequent listener, so this is good that you guys are doing it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Plicki. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout, or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more coaching content in game, out of the game, and anything in between.